Chivalry. The term chivalry in origin has the meaning horsemanship. Formed in Old French in the 11th century from chevalier, meaning horseman and knight. In English, the term appears from 1292. The meaning of the term evolved over time for the original concrete military meaning, status or feat associated with military follower owning a horse, or a group of mounted knights, to the ideal of Christian warrior ethos propagated in the Romance genre, which was becoming popular during the 12th century, and the ideal of courtly love propagated in the contemporary mincing and related genres. The code of chivalry is thus a product of the late Middle Ages, evolving after the end of the Crusades, partly from the idolization of historical knights fighting in the Holy Land, partly from the ideals of courtly love. Regardless of the diverse written definitions of chivalry, the medieval knightly class was adept at the art of war, trained in fighting in armor with horses, lances, swords, and shields. Knights were taught to excel in the arms, to show courage, to be gallant and loyal, and swear off cowardice and baseness. Related to chivalry was the practice of heraldry and its elaborate rules of displaying a coat of arms. When not fighting, chivalric knights typically resided in castles or fortified houses, while some knights lived in courts of kings, dukes, and other great lords. The skills of the knight carried over to peacetime activities such as the hunt and tournament. Christianity had a modified influence on the classical concept of heroism and virtue, nowadays identified with the virtues of chivalry. The peace and truce of God in the 10th century was one such example, with limits placed on knights to protect and honor the weaker members of society, and also help the church maintain peace. At the same time, the church became more tolerant of war and the defense of faith. The first noted support of chivalric vocation or establishment of knightly class to ensure the sanctity of legitimacy of Christianity was written in 930 by Odo, abbot of Cluny, in the Vita of St. George of Alaric, which argued that sanctity of Christ and Christianity doctrine can be demonstrated through the legitimate unsheathing of the sword against the enemy. In the 11th century, the concept of the Knight of Christ gained currency in France, Spain, and Italy. These concepts of religious chivalry were further elaborated in the era of Crusades, with the Crusades themselves often being seen as a chivalrous enterprise. Their ideals of chivalry were also further influenced by Saladin, who was viewed as a chivalrous knight by medieval Christian writers. The military orders of the Crusades, which developed in the period, came to be seen as the earliest flowering of chivalry, although it remains unclear to what extent the notable knights of the period, Saladin, Godfrey of Bouillon, William Marshall, or Bertrand de Guesclin, actually did set standards of knightly behavior, or to what extent they merely behave according to existing models of conduct, which came in retrospect to the interpret along the lines of chivalry ideal of the late Middle Ages. From the 12th century onward, chivalry came to be understood as a moral, religious, and social code of knightly conduct. The particulars of the code varied, but codes would emphasize virtues of courage, honor, and service. Chivalry also came to refer to an idealization of life and manners of the knight at home in his castle and with his court. In the later Middle Ages, wealthy merchants strove to adapt chivalric attitudes. The sons of the bourgeoisie were educated at aristocratic courts, where they were trained in the manners of knightly class. This was a democratization of chivalry, leading to a new genre, including the courtesy book, which were guides in behavior of gentlemen. Thus, the post-medieval gentlemanly code of value of a man's honor, respect for women, and a concern for those less fortunate is directly derived from the earlier ideals of chivalry and historical forces which created it. The medieval development of chivalry was the concept of honor of a lady and the ensuing knightly devotion of it, not only derived from the thinking about the Virgin Mary, but also contributed to it. The medieval veneration of Virgin Mary was contrasted by the fact that the ordinary woman, especially those outside aristocratic circles, were looked down upon. Although women were at times viewed as a source of evil, it was Mary who, as mediator to God, was a source of refuge for man. The development of medieval Mariology and the changing attitudes towards women paralleled each other and can be understood in a common context. Chivalry can be classified into three basic but overlapping areas. First, duties to countrymen and fellow Christians. This contains virtues such as mercy, courage, valor, fairness, protection of the weak and of the poor. And in this servanthood of knight to his lord, this also brings with the idea of being willing to give one's life for another's, whether he would be giving his life to a poor man or his lord. Second, duties to God. This would contain being faithful to God, protecting the innocent, being faithful to the church, being the champion of good against evil, being generous and obeying God above the feudal lord. Third, duties to women. This is probably the most familiar aspect of chivalry. This would contain what is often called courtly love, the idea that the knight is to serve a lady, and after her all the ladies. Most especially in this category is a general gentleness and graciousness to all women. In the general discourse of the late 20th century, chivalry became a technical term for men's tendency to lend more attention